Welcome to our channel, Book by Book. Today we're diving into a really significant book, Chris Miller's 2022 work, Chip War: The Fight for the World's Most Critical Technology. It's a real eye-opener.
It really is. And it's not just, a tech history book. Miller's an economic historian, so he gives this huge picture connecting these tiny, tiny components to, well, basically everything. Global power, geopolitics.
Exactly. And that's the core thesis, isn't it? That microchips aren't just these little things inside our gadgets. Miller argues they are the absolute foundation of global power today. They run modern warfare, commerce, our everyday lives, everything.
Yeah, he pulls back the curtain completely. We just don't think about them, but they're fundamental.
He uses this comparison, calling chips the new oil, but maybe even more vital.
I think that's right, because oil fuels things, but chips enable things. They're the brains. I mean, think about it. They guide missiles. They keep premature babies alive in ICUs. They run the satellites for GPS and communication. And yeah, they're in every single smartphone, every data center. The scope is just immense.
Which means understanding who controls how they're made. That's crucial. So our mission today with this book-by-book summary is to break it down for you. We want to give you the key takeaways, the 6 main lessons, the core ideas Miller presents, and some really practical insights.
Because understanding this, well, it helps you understand the modern world, frankly. It's about the choke points, the vulnerabilities.
And the central idea, just to reinforce it before we dive in, controlling chip design and manufacturing. That translates directly to global influence, right? Economics, security, the works.
Absolutely. If you control that chain, you control a massive slice of the global economy and military power. The U.S. built that dominance over decades, but now, well, now it's a serious competition, especially with state-backed efforts in Asia.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. Part 1, the birth of power from transistor to geopolitics. This covers Miller's first big lesson.
Right. Lesson 1 is all about the journey, how we got from the invention of the transistor at Bell Labs, that tiny switch, replacing the old, bulky vacuum tubes.
A massive leap.
Huge. Then came the integrated circuit, putting hundreds, then thousands of transistors onto one silicon chip. And that evolved into the complex logic and memory chips we have today. This whole progression didn't just enable new products, it fundamentally created the digital age we live in.
And it wasn't just a commercial development. Miller really emphasizes the military angle from the start, doesn't he? The Cold War connection.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. government, particularly the Department of Defense, wasn't just watching this happen. They were actively funding it, pushing it forward. Reliability and miniaturization were key.
Like for the missile programs.
Exactly. Think about the Minuteman missile program. Size and weight were critical. They needed super reliable, small components. This demand led to huge early contracts for companies like Texas Instruments and Fairchild Semiconductor. That money helped them perfect manufacturing, push designs, get transistor density up way faster than the consumer market alone ever would have.
So that early strategic push, that military investment, basically created a tech gap with the Soviet Union.
A massive one. The West could make these complex, tiny, reliable chips. The Soviets, they struggled. They could copy older designs sometimes or match raw industrial output in other areas, but they couldn't consistently miniaturize, manufacture reliably at scale, or, crucially, innovate on the cutting-edge processes needed. Why was that? Their system. Miller argues their centralized, very secretive system just wasn't agile enough. It lacked that competitive, sort of chaotic but innovative ecosystem you had in Silicon Valley. So yeah, mastering that foundational tech early gave the U.S. decades of advantage. Miller uses this great analogy to help visualize the impact. He calls chips the keystone species. It's a really effective way to put it, I think. In ecology, a keystone species holds the whole ecosystem together. Take it out, and things collapse. Miller says once chips evolved, the whole habitat, the economy, military doctrines, logistics, consumer tech, it all reorganized around them. Modern life is built on the chip.
So the big takeaway from lesson 1 is identifying and mastering those foundational technologies early gives you a massive, long-lasting edge. Whether you're a nation or even a company, it shifted global power once, and it's still doing it. Okay, fast forward to today. That power structure is now incredibly complex, globalized, and, as Miller points out, really fragile. This brings us to part 2. The global paradox fragility and the manufacturing shift. We're looking at lessons 2 and 3 here.
Yeah, let's start with lesson 2, the supply chain's fragile web. The chip industry is this amazing example of global collaboration, right? Super specialized, intricate.
But that complexity creates its own problem.
Exactly. It's interwoven, but also highly, highly concentrated. And that concentration creates huge strategic vulnerabilities, choke points, as Miller calls them.
What are the main choke points we're talking about?
Well, the fabrication itself actually making the chips. Then there's the supply of ultra-pure silicon wafers. But the big ones are geographically and corporately clustered. You've got Taiwan's TSMC.
Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. They're huge in the foundry business, making chips designed by others.
The biggest, especially for the most advanced chips.
Yeah.
Then you've got Samsung in South Korea, another giant in fabrication and memory. But maybe the tightest choke point of all is ASML in the Netherlands.
Right, ASML and their lithography machines,
Oh,
especially the EUV ones. Can you unpack why there's such a bottleneck? It's pretty critical to the whole story.
it really is.
Yeah.
EUV stands for Extreme Ultraviolet Lithography. It's the technology needed to print the incredibly fine circuits on the most advanced chips. We're talking features just a few atoms wide. These are essential for things like cutting-edge AI, supercomputers.
And making these machines is complicated.
Unbelievably complicated. They involve, like, hitting tiny droplets of molten tin with powerful lasers thousands of times a second to create the right kind of plasma to generate the EUV light. Each machine costs upwards of $150 million, weighs about 180 tons, needs components from specialized suppliers all over the globe.
And basically no one else can do it.
Nope. ASML has a near total monopoly on this specific, crucial technology. So if you want to make the most advanced chips, you have to buy these machines from ASML. That technological barrier is immense for anyone trying to catch up, like China.
And this fragility isn't just theoretical, right? We saw it play out recently.
Oh yeah, the 2020-2021 chip shortages. Remember that chaos? It was a perfect storm, pandemic, demand shifts, people working from home needing new gear, maybe some factory hiccups.
And suddenly car production lines halted, electronics were delayed.
Exactly. A small disruption like a fire in one factory in Japan or just a surge in demand for PlayStations rippled across the entire global economy. Why? Because there was no spare capacity, no real alternative suppliers for many specific types of chips. The system was too lean, too concentrated.
Miller uses an analogy of a rope made of many threads, right?
Yeah, we're relying too much on one thread, one company, or one region makes the whole rope much more likely to snap under pressure.
This vulnerability, this concentration, it leads directly into lesson 3, design versus manufacturing. This is about the big strategic choice, particularly in the U.S., to split those two things apart.
Right. This is a huge shift. Historically, companies like Intel did both. They designed and manufactured their chips, the integrated model. But over time, especially U.S. firms, started moving towards the fabless model.
Meaning they focus just on the design, the intellectual property, the high-margin stuff.
Exactly. Think NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm, Apple's chip designers, ARM. They create the blueprints, the architecture. They design incredibly complex chips. But the actual making of the chips, the fabrication or fab work, which is super capital intensive, lower margin, higher risk, that got outsourced.
So to the foundries we mentioned, like TSMC and Samsung, mostly in Asia.
Precisely. Taiwan and South Korea especially built huge foundry businesses, often with significant government support and industrial policy helping them along. Cheaper labor, focused investment. It made economic sense at the time for the U.S. design firms.
But Miller argues this was a major strategic misstep.
That's his core argument for this lesson. He says that while outsourcing cut costs and maybe even accelerated some consumer tech innovation in the short term, cheaper gadgets, faster phones, it was a potentially catastrophic mistake from a national security and long-term innovation perspective.
But wait, if the U.S. and its allies still dominate the cutting-edge design, the really advanced AI chips from NVIDIA, for instance, isn't that where the real power and value lie now? Is it fair to call outsourcing manufacturing a failure if it freed up capital for design innovation?
That's the crucial debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Miller's counterargument is that design and manufacturing aren't totally separate. He believes you lose something vital when you don't actually make the things you design. You lose that hands-on knowledge of the manufacturing process, the constraints, the possibilities for the next generation. That feedback loop gets broken.
Interesting point.
And beyond the innovation angle, you lose strategic resilience. When the world desperately needed more chips in 2021, the U.S. couldn't just flip a switch. It had to ask, maybe even pressure, TSMC to build more capacity, because the physical manufacturing capability wasn't primarily domestic anymore. Control over the means of production matters, especially in a crisis.
So Miller's analogy applies here too. It's like having the world's best recipe for secret sauce.
But you've outsourced the kitchen, the special pans, even the sourcing of the rare ingredients to someone else, maybe somewhere politically unstable. You might save money initially, but you've lost fundamental control and security.
Okay, so we've got this fragile, globally concentrated system. Now let's look at how it's being used in global competition. Part 3, technology as a weapon. This really gets to the heart of the war in chip war.
Absolutely. This leads us to lesson 4. Chips as a geopolitical weapon. Once semiconductors became this critical and the supply chain got so concentrated, they stopped being just commercial goods. They inevitably became instruments of national power.
Meaning governments started using access to chips, or the technology to make them, as leverage.
Exactly. Export controls, trade sanctions, industrial policy, subsidies.
Yeah.
These are now central tools, or maybe weapons, in the competition between great powers.
And this isn't new, Miller points out. The U.S. did this during the Cold War.
Right. There was an organization called COCOM, the Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls. Basically, the U.S. and its allies used it very effectively to restrict the Soviet Union and its allies from getting access to advanced Western technology, especially microchips needed for military applications.
Like for missile guidance or advanced computing.
Precisely. It wasn't about stopping them from getting basic transistors. It was about denying them the cutting-edge stuff that gave Western military systems a decisive technological advantage in precision, speed, and reliability. That technical denial really worked.
And now we're seeing a similar playbook, but aimed at China.
Very much so, but perhaps even more comprehensively. Miller details the current U.S. strategy, which is aggressively trying to limit China's access to the most advanced semiconductors, particularly those needed for things like artificial intelligence, supercomputing, and next-generation military tech.
And it's not just blocking the sale of finished chips, right? It goes deeper.
Much deeper. The U.S. export controls target the specialized manufacturing equipment, crucially, those ASML EUV machines we talked about. They also target the sophisticated software used to design chips, specific chemicals and materials needed for advanced fabs, and even, controversially, restricting U.S. persons or expertise from working in certain Chinese chip facilities. It's an attempt to block China at multiple points in the value chain.
And China's reaction?
Predictably, they're pushing back hard, pouring absolutely massive amounts of money, hundreds of billions of dollars, into developing their own domestic chip industry. They call it localization or self-reliance. They see overcoming this technological dependence as an existential national security issue. This fight over chip access is arguably the central front in the broader U.S.-China strategic competition. It's not just about iPhones, it's about who controls the future of AI and military power.
So for anyone listening, a business leader, an investor, the takeaway is crystal clear. Technology, especially foundational tech like chips, is now inherently strategic. You can't just think about markets.
No, you absolutely can't. A government decision made for national security reasons you might not even fully understand can suddenly cut off your supply, block your access to a key market, or ban the export of critical equipment your suppliers rely on. It can reshape entire industries overnight, regardless of purely commercial factors.
Miller uses a powerful analogy here, too. He calls chips the queen piece on the global chessboard.
It's a good one. Because controlling the queen gives you immense power and flexibility. Controlling chips allows a nation to influence everything from military balance to economic growth to the future development path of critical technologies like AI.
This struggle for control naturally leads to Lesson 5, the necessity of national strategy. Miller makes the case that leadership in chips isn't something that just happens organically through market forces.
Not at all. It requires deliberate, long-term strategic action by nations. Sustaining leadership, or even just catching up, requires decades of focused effort, massive investment, a clear plan, and continuous innovation, often coordinated between government and industry.
And he contrasts the U.S. approach, which became more reliant on market forces and the fabless model, with other countries.
Exactly. Look at Japan in the 80s, or South Korea, and especially Taiwan more recently. Their rise in the semiconductor industry wasn't accidental, it was heavily state-guided. Their governments provided huge subsidies, cheap land, tax breaks, protectionist policies sometimes, and targeted support for national champions companies like Samsung, SK Hynix in Korea, and of course TSMC in Taiwan. They engineered their success by making chip manufacturing a national strategic priority.
Whereas the U.S., by sort of assuming design leadership and offshore manufacturing would be enough.
Risk falling behind strategically, Miller argues. The market, left to its own devices, didn't properly price in the huge geopolitical risks of concentrating so much critical manufacturing in one potentially volatile region. Efficiency trumped resilience for a while.
So things like the recent US CTS Act or similar initiatives in Europe, these are basically attempts to correct that perceived strategic error.
Absolutely. They are very expensive, very direct government interventions, acknowledging that relying solely on the global market for something this critical was potentially dangerous. It's an effort to rebuild domestic capacity and ensure supply chain security, moving away from that passive dependence. It's about restoring strategic resilience, not just boosting the economy short term.
Miller has another analogy for this long-term commitment, doesn't he? The redwood tree.
Yes, I like that one too. Building leadership in semiconductors is like growing a giant redwood. It doesn't happen in a quarter or even a year. It takes decades of careful planning, planting the seeds, consistent nurturing, protecting it, and investing heavily in the foundations, the manufacturing base, the R&D ecosystem before you get that towering, dominant presence. You can't let short-term profit motives dictate long-term strategic survival in this game.
Okay, let's move into part 4. Frameworks, future, and fragility. We're looking ahead now at the path forward for chips, which Miller suggests is getting even tougher. This is lesson 6, the rising stakes and uncertainty.
Yeah, the future looks incredibly challenging, mainly because of the sheer cost involved. Miller points out that developing the next generation of chips, moving beyond the current 3-nanometer node to 2-nanometer and below, and building the fabs to produce them, the costs are just astronomical.
How much are we talking?
We're talking tens of billions of dollars for a single advanced fab. The R&D for the next-gen lithography tools, the process development, it could easily push towards $100 billion or more for the leading companies combined just to stay on the cutting edge. These kinds of costs mean only a handful of players, giant corporations, heavily backed by wealthy nations, can realistically compete at the very top end. It's becoming an oligopoly by necessity.
And these immense costs are layered on top of already significant geopolitical risks.
Exactly. The biggest elephant in the room remains Taiwan. The fact that the vast majority of the world's most advanced logic chips are made on an island that China claims as its own territory, well, it's arguably the single biggest geopolitical flashpoint on the planet.
Any conflict there?
Would be catastrophic for the global economy. It would instantly halt the supply of critical chips needed for almost everything, triggering a global economic shock, far worse than the 2021 shortages, possibly worse than anything we've seen in modern times.
And Taiwan isn't the only risk factor, right? There are material dependencies, too.
Right? Making chips requires a whole range of specialized materials, ultra-pure silicon wafers, specific chemicals, photoresists, rare gases like neon, often sourced from regions like Ukraine previously, certain rare earth elements used in polishing. Many of these have their own concentrated supply chains, sometimes reliant on single companies or countries that could become political leverage points or sources of disruption.
So the takeaway from lesson 6 is that the stakes, financial, strategic, geopolitical, are only going up.
They're intensifying. The chip shortages were a wake-up call, but the ongoing weaponization of these supply chains means fragility is now a constant state. Everyone involved, governments, investors, companies, must plan for disruption. Resilience isn't a buzzword. It's a strategic imperative.
Which means things like building redundant supply chains, maybe even holding more inventory, diversifying sources, even if it costs more.
Yes, efficiency has to be balanced, maybe even sometimes sacrificed, for the sake of security and resilience. Miller paints this picture of the chip ecosystem as a high-wire walker.
With very few safety nets.
Precisely. The reliance on ASML for lithography, on TSMC for advanced fabs, on specific material suppliers, it's incredibly precarious. One major misstep, a geopolitical crisis, a natural disaster hitting a key facility, a prolonged trade war escalating could cause the whole thing to wobble or even collapse with massive global consequences.
Okay, so to help us navigate this complex world, Miller also provides some useful frameworks, some core concepts for thinking about strategic tech. It's worth quickly touching on these.
Definitely. These are like mental tools. First, the famous one, Moore's Law.
Often mentioned, sometimes misunderstood.
All right. It's not really a physical law, more an observation Gordon Moore made back in the 60s, that the number of transistors you could fit on a chip roughly doubled every couple of years while the cost came down. This relentless doubling has been the engine driving the digital revolution for decades: faster, cheaper computing power.
But there are questions now about whether it can continue.
Big questions. We're bumping up against physical limits. The cost of shrinking transistors further is exploding. If Moore's law slows significantly or ends, it has huge implications for everything from AI development to economic growth.
Then there's the concept we discussed earlier, the fabless versus founder model.
Yeah, understanding this split is key. Fabless companies like NVIDIA or Apple, design the chips. That's the IP, the architecture. Founders like TSMC or Samsung actually build the physical chips for them. This split defines where value and, crucially, where strategic control and choke points lie in the industry. NVIDIA might have a huge market gap, but TSMC controls the physical production bottleneck.
And that leads into another critical concept, weaponized interdependence.
This is a really important framework for understanding modern geopolitics. The idea is that deep economic ties and supply chain connections, which seem like they should create stability, can actually be turned into weapons.
How so?
Because if country A depends heavily on country B for a critical component like advanced chips, or the machines to make them, country, or its allies, can threaten to cut off that supply to coerce country A into changing its policies. The U.S. restricting ASML sales to China is a perfect example. The interdependence itself becomes the leverage point. It turns trade links into potential tools of coercion.
And finally, just reinforcing the idea of constantly watching the choke points and bottlenecks.
Right. It's not enough to know the system is fragile. You need to know where it's fragile. Is it the EUV machines from ASML? Is it the supply of ultra-pure silicon wafers? Is it specific rare gases? Is it the electronic design automation, EDA software, dominated by a few U.S. firms? Identifying these specific potential points of failure is absolutely critical for any kind of risk assessment or strategic planning.
Okay, this has been a lot of information covering the history, the fragility, the geopolitics. Let's try to boil it down now into part 5. Actionable takeaways. These are practical insights from Miller's analysis that you, our listener, whether you're in business, policy, or just trying to understand the world, can actually use. We've got 8 key points.
Right. Let's make this really concrete. Number 1, and maybe the most fundamental, map your technology value chain. Seriously.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to know where the critical components and technologies your business relies on come from. Who makes them? Where are they physically located? Is there only one supplier? If you don't know this, you're flying blind in a very risky environment. Ignorance here isn't just bliss. It's a huge strategic liability.
Okay, number 2, invest in resilience. This means actively building redundancy. Don't rely on a single source. Look for alternative suppliers, maybe even think about manufacturing backups or holding more strategic inventory for critical parts. The old just-in-time philosophy optimized for cost, but Miller shows that for strategic goods like chips, it creates unacceptable fragility. Resilience costs money, but it might be the cost of survival.
Third, align with national or regional strategy. We're in an era where governments see tech like chips as vital national security assets. Pay attention to policies like the TSMC Act in the U.S. or similar efforts in Europe or Asia. Aligning your business strategy with these public initiatives can potentially unlock funding, partnerships, subsidies, and regulatory support that can help you secure your supply chain or build capacity. Don't fight the geopolitical tide. Try to swim with it where you can.
Number 4, don't outsource your core capabilities. This is a big one from Miller's analysis. While outsourcing non-critical functions might make sense, you need to keep tight control over your most critical manufacturing processes, your core intellectual property, especially process know-how, and your deep technical expertise. For nations, Miller argues losing the ability to make the most advanced chips is tantamount to losing control over your future. For companies, losing core tech control can be fatal long-term.
Fifth, monitor the choke points intensely. Keep a close eye on those critical bottlenecks we discussed, advanced lithography from ASML, maybe specialized chemicals from a single German supplier, rare earth materials dominated by China, key chip design software. Understand the risks associated with these choke points, geopolitical risks, supply risks, and factor that into your sourcing and diversification strategies.
6th, and this follows directly, understand geopolitics is now a constant business variable. Technology, especially critical tech, does not operate in a purely commercial sphere anymore. Export controls, sanctions, trade wars, shifting alliances, these aren't just background noise. They can directly impact your operations, your market access, your supply chain stability. Strategic awareness is as important as market analysis now.
7th, support long-term, high-risk innovation. Leadership in areas like semiconductors requires patient capital and a long-term view. It's about sustained, heavy R&D investment over decades, accepting that breakthroughs take time and might fail. Both businesses and policymakers need to resist prioritizing short-term quarterly results over the long-term investments needed to maintain or gain technological leadership. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And finally, number 8, be acutely aware of the systemic implications. Recognize that dependence on single points of failure, whether it's one company, one country, or one geographic region like Taiwan, creates systemic risks for everyone. Think about the ethical considerations, the resilience implications. Constantly reevaluate these risks. Don't just optimize for the lowest immediate cost. Proactive risk management is key.
Taken together, these 8 points really distill the strategic lessons of chip war. The book is a powerful call for clarity and urgency. If there's one overarching message, it's that leadership and security in the 21st century fundamentally depend on controlling critical infrastructure. And right now, the semiconductor ecosystem is the world's most critical infrastructure.
Control over chip design and manufacturing means influence over global economics and security. It's that simple and that profound.
Miller's book lays out the fault lines in our global system, the dependencies we've built, and the intense struggle now underway to control them.
So, as we wrap up this book by book summary, here's a final thought to leave you with, drawn directly from the Warning Miller issues. Take a hard look around. What parts of your own work, your company's operations, your country's security, or even just your daily life's essential services are you currently taking for granted? How much do they rely, perhaps invisibly, on a steady supply of advanced semiconductors?
And then ask yourself, how prepared are you really? How would you react? How would your organization or your country cope if a major disruption, another pandemic, a natural disaster, or God forbid, a conflict over Taiwan suddenly cut off that supply?
It's a sobering question, but one Miller argues we absolutely have to confront. It's about strategic survival in this new era. And that concludes our summary of Chris Miller's essential book, Chip War. We really hope walking through these key lessons, concepts, and actionable takeaways has been valuable for you. If you found this summary helpful, please do subscribe to our channel, Book by Book, for more deep dives into important books. And please share this summary with friends, colleagues, anyone you think would benefit from understanding these critical global dynamics. Oh, and giving us a like really helps too. That support truly motivates us to keep producing the best book summaries we can. Thanks so much for listening.